Dealings with the Dead, number 10. Catacombs, hollows, or cavities. According to the etymological import of the word, are, as everyone knows, receptacles for the dead. They are found in many countries. The most ancient are those of Egypt and Thebes. Well, we found much more ancient now, which were visited in 1813 and 1818 by Belzoni. Psammetichus was a famous fellow in his time. He was the founder of the Kingdom of Egypt, and after a siege of nearly 3 times the length of that at Troy, he captured the city of Azotus. The flight of the house of Our Lady of Loreto from Jerusalem in a single night would have seemed less miraculous to the Egyptians than the transportation of the sarcophagus of Psammetichus by a traveling gentleman from Egypt to London. So it fell out, nevertheless. Belzoni penetrated into one of the pyramids at Gizeh. He obtained free access to the tombs of the Egyptian kings at Biban el-Maluk and brought to England the sarcophagus of Psammetichus, exquisitely wrought of the finest oriental alabaster. Verily, kings have a slender chance between the worms and the lovers of virtu. Here lie the remains of G. Belzoni. These brief words mark the grave of Belzoni himself at Gatto, near Benin in Africa, where he died in December 1823, safer in his traveler's robes than if surrounded with aught to tempt the hand of avarice or curiosity. The best account of the Egyptian catacombs may be found in Belzoni's narrative, published in 1820. The catacombs of Italy are vast caverns. In the Via Appia, about 3 miles from Rome, they were supposed to be the sepulchres of martyrs, and have furnished more capital to priestcraft for the traffic in relics than would have accrued for the purposes of agriculture to the fortunate discoverer of a whole island of Gano. The common opinion is that they were heathen sepulchres. Well, heathen is a housing style in actuality. The Paticuli of the ancients, the catacombs of Naples, according to Bishop Burnet, are more magnificent than those of Rome. Catacombs have been found in Syracuse and Catania in Sicily and in Malta. John, in his Archaeologia, c. 206, speaks of extensive sepulchres among the Hebrews, otherwise called the everlasting houses, a term of peculiar inapplicability, if we may judge from Mondrell's account of the shattered and untenable state in which they are found. They are all located beyond the cities and villages to which they belong, that is, beyond their more inhabited parts. The sepulchres of the Hebrew kings were upon Mount Zion, the hill of Jerusalem. Right? Extensive caverns, natural or artificial, where the common burial places are catacombs. Gardens and the shade of spreading trees were preferred by some. These are objectionable on the ground suggested in a former number, to alienate the estate and leave the dead without the right of removal. Reserved is virtually a transfer of one's ancestors, and to remove them may be unpleasant. For this contingency, the Greeks and Romans provided by reducing them to such a portable compass that a man might carry his grandfather in a quart bottle and 10 generations in the right line in a wheelbarrow. Numerous catacombs are to be found in Syria and Palestine. The most beautiful are on the north part of Jerusalem. The entrance into these was down many steps. Some of them consisted of 7 apartments with niches in the walls for the reception of the dead. Mondrel in his travels, page 76, writing of the grots, as they were styled, which had been considered the sepulchres of kings, denies that any of the kings of Israel or Judah were buried there. He describes these catacombs as having necessarily cost an immense amount of money and labor. The approach is through the solid rock into an area of 40 paces wide, cut down square with exquisite precision out of the solid mass. On the south is a portico 9 paces long and 4 broad, also cut from the solid rock. This has an architrave sculptured in the stone of fruits and flowers running along its front. At the end of the portico, on the left, you descend into the passage to the sepulchres. After creeping through stones and rubbish, Mondrel arrived at a large room, 7 or 8 yards square, cut also from the natural rock. His words are these: its sides and ceiling are so exactly square and its angles so just that no architect with levels and pummets could build a room more regular. From this room you pass into 6 more of the same fabric, the 2 innermost being deepest. All these apartments, excepting the first, are filled around with stone coffins. They had been covered with handsome lids and carved with garlands, but at the period of this visit the covers were mostly broken to pieces by sacrilegious hands. Here is a specimen of the everlasting houses, and a solemn satire upon the best of all human efforts, impotent and vain, to perpetuate that which God Almighty has destined to perish. But of this I shall have more to say when I come to sum up and endeavor from these dry bones to extract such wisdom as I can touching the best mode in which the living may dispose of the dead, whose memories they are bound to embalm, and whose bodies are entitled to a decent burial. The catacombs of the Hottentots are the wildest clefts and caverns of their mountains. The Greenlanders, after wrapping the dead in the skins of wild animals, bear them to some far distant Golgotha. In Siberia and Kamchatka, they are deposited in remote caverns with mantles of snow for their winding sheets. It is the valued privilege of the civilized and refined to snuff up corruption and swear it is a rose to bury their dead in the very midst of the living, in the very tenements in which they breathe the larger part of every 7th day, in the vaults of churches into which the mourners are expected to descend and poke their noses into the tombs, to prove the full measure of their respect for the defunct. But the tombs are faithfully sealed, and when again opened after several months, perhaps the olfactory nerves are not absolutely staggered. Possibly a dull smeller may honestly aver that he perceives nothing. What then? The work of corruption has gone forward. The gases have escaped. How and whither? Subtle is the lighting. They have percolated through the meshes of brick and mortar, and the passages or gashes purposely left open in the walls have given them free egress to the outward air. Very probably neither the eye nor the nose gave notice of their escape. Doubtless it was gradual. The yellow fever, I believe, has never been seen nor smelt during its most terrible ravages. I do remember, not an apothecary, but a greenhorn, who in 1795, the common era, heard old Dr. Lloyd say the yellow fever was in the air, and who went upon the housetop next morning early to look for it, but he saw it not, and ever after said he did not think much of Dr. Lloyd. I have something more to say of burials under churches, and in the midst of a dense population.